All right, guys, welcome. My name is Chelsea. I am the Director of Outreach for MADVoters. We are incredibly excited about tonight's panel. We're going to be talking about reproductive rights and freedom in Indiana. I know that this is such a huge topic for all of us, and especially going into the elections this year. It is a huge topic. So I am going to go ahead and let you guys get started introducing yourselves. I'm going to go in order on my screen. Heidi, we're going to start with you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heidi Beidinger, and I'm running for Indiana State Rep for District 5, which includes Granger, Mishawaka, and Osceola. And if you're not familiar with those town names, it is directly east of South Bend. I share a border with South Bend. Why am I running? I ran in 2022, and the truth of the matter is that my daughters asked me to run for office. Roe had just gotten flipped, and our state had just passed the most restrictive abortion ban. And there's a longer story with it that's actually quite emotional and touching. It even still causes me to have tears every now and then. But the truth of the matter is that my daughters were fearful for their future and said, can you run? Because nobody is running against this guy, and he's just going to be allowed to sail right back in. So we mounted a campaign, and I got in, I think, just like a day under the deadline, and I was caucused in, and we've mounted an incredible 4-month campaign. And now here we are, unfinished business. And I am so, so glad to hear that women's rights is at the top of the agenda for many of us, if not all of us. We've got a lot of unfinished work to do. That's me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Heidi. Thank you for sharing that with us. And, you're not alone in this being your reason for stepping up. I think we're seeing it all across the US, parents being like, not on my watch. We have this urge to protect the young, and, good for you. Thank you so much for stepping up and doing that. Stephanie, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Stephanie Jo Yocum. I am running for state rep for District 88, which has a portion of 4 different counties on the northeast side of central Indiana. So it's got a little bit of Marion County, it's got a little bit of Hamilton County up into Madison County, and then about 2/3 of Hancock County. I'm running because the person who currently has this seat needs to go. He was one of the folks who voted to strip any exceptions from the abortion ban. That was one of the major reasons that I decided to say yes. After saying no, actually being asked to run in the seat a couple times. But after doing my research and realizing the harm he was doing to our communities, to our girls, to our women. And he also was the person who authored the bill to take away Gary's ability to hold gun sellers and manufacturers accountable. He also authored that bill. Like, he's dangerous. And so I decided that it was time to step in and see if I could get him to step aside by vote. So that is why I'm here, and I'm super excited to be here. I am seeing the passion in voters' eyes when I'm knocking on doors. I'm exceptionally seeing it in dads. I think we think about this all the time about being moms being super concerned about their kids, and I have a 5-year-old little girl, and I am super concerned, but I'm hearing a lot of dads being really concerned about their little girls. And so it just really inspires me to keep on going and keep on knocking on doors. So I'm so glad to see so many of you here today, and I appreciate being able to be here.
Thank you so much. I actually got to hear Stephanie speak at the State House recently and talk about her opponent and how proud he was of his votes when it came to the abortion ban and the exceptions. And it's crushing to hear it. Thank you for stepping up to run against him. Oh my gosh. Abby, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Abby Norden. I'm running for state representative for District 81. I'm running against Martin Carball, who also voted no exception. So I ran against him in 2022 as an independent because somebody asked me right before the cutoff, and I was just like, sure, let's do this. And then I was not going to run again because my house got broken into a lot, and they successfully intimidated me for a little bit. But then somebody asked me to run again, and everything that's happening, I just couldn't say no, because my family is already the target of so many of these laws that we might as well just stay and keep fighting, keep trying. And even if I don't get elected, at least I am making more noise, making people angry enough to to pay attention and do something. And yeah, so my platform is just basic human rights for Hoosiers, because if you look up the Charter of the Declaration of UN Rights, we don't have those in the state. We don't have those in a lot of places in this country. So the goal is just to educate voters on what human rights are and that they actually deserve them, because especially here, I feel like a lot of people don't think they deserve them. So that's my platform, is mostly just running on education to inform people so that hopefully we all collectively have enough of these table conversations where we end it.
I think it makes sense why Abby is one of our MVPs. That education piece is so incredibly important. We can't expect people to make truly informed decisions without being educated on these issues. So thank you guys all for being here so much. Again, I know that this is such a big topic, and I'm sure everybody is excited to hear what you have to say about what is going on. First, I would actually like to ask something. Were any of you guys, were you in Indiana during that abortion ban, and how did that feel for you? And I'm gonna start with Abby, since Abby went last.
Terrifying. I had my last miscarriage in 2019, and that was a very horrific experience. And I could not imagine not having access to medical care if it didn't get worse. Like, I couldn't imagine going through that. So having just experienced that not very long before the abortion bans took effect, it was definitely on my radar, and it did make me question whether or not I should stay in the state or not. Um, but ultimately we decided to stay. So, but fear was the only thing I could think of, just fear.
I could go next. I was,
You're muted,
Oh.
Chelsea.
So the question was, where were we when this all happened, right? So I was at home and my two daughters were here. So again, it ties into that story of a couple days later when they asked me to run for office. But it was sort of surreal because my mother, their grandmother, her mom started the now version in Holland, in the Netherlands, back in the early 1900s. So we have this long lineage and heritage of women standing up for women standing up for women's rights and fighting for those rights. And so my mom has told those stories to my girls, right? So we've been fighting for these rights. And then on that day, it's when my daughters looked at me and said, oh my God, like they've just rolled it all back. They just undid all the work that you all have been doing for the last few decades. And how can that be in the 21st century in the United States, in the most powerful country? How can they suppress women the way that they're suppressing women? We represent 50% of the population, and it's literally like we have no voice. Men made those decisions. I know there are a few women too, but men made those decisions about us, and it scared the hell out of everybody in my household.
So as soon as the decision came down about Dobbs, I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was a state rep. She has since resigned. And I knew that they had called a special session. She told me they called a special session. This is what's going to happen. And so I was at the State House, I don't know how many days in a row, working with the ACLU, doing as much as I could to just be as loud as possible, but I knew that it was futile. I was really proud of our Democratic legislators for pushing as hard as they could. And there were also a couple Republican legislators that stood up against their party, not many, but they faced some serious backlash from that, dangerous backlash. You know, so I knew it was going to happen, but I was so proud to see that regardless, there were so many people standing up to push for as much as possible to be saved. At that time, I was also going through a program with a woman who's become a friend of mine who was an abortion provider. And so she was sharing with us, you know, what her patients were going through, what she was going through as a professional, how she was now flying out of state in order to continue to serve patients. And it all just, you know, I wish I could have said it was surreal, but honestly, I wasn't surprised. I knew it was going to happen. And I just was angry. And I think I did everything I thought to do, which was just show up and be there and hug people and figure out how to give supports to people who might need it in the moment. And then just try and immediately get to work. And so that's where I was. It's where I have continued to be as much as possible since then.
You know, I have to wonder if we ever hugged during those times, because I hugged a lot of women. I was at the State House a lot during that time. And, you know, I think we all made some very powerful bonds. And I think ultimately this really put MADVoters on the path that we're on now. So this was something that really, really affected our state. And, you know, I'd like to know, you guys personally in your areas, in your cities, have you seen any major effects of this ban on your area? And if
Hey,
so,
Chelsea, I just wanted to say real quick, Dr. Val is on, but she had to call in because of that technical issue. So she is that number that's 701-0976. So whenever you're ready for her, she's ready to hop on. Val, just unmute yourself, please.
yes, perfect. Actually, so before we get to this next question, let's just have Dr. McCray introduce herself so that you guys know all about her and her campaign. Please, Dr. McCray.
Well, hopefully she figures out how to unmute herself.
Those
So
are
Dr. Val, are you on? Sorry, guys, we're having so many technical difficulties. So just to let you guys know, Dr. Valerie McCray is running for United States Senate. I'm her campaign director for the national United States Senate. So not state, but U.S. So if she wins, when she wins, she'll end up in Washington, D.C. She has been fighting very hard to win past the primaries to get in, you know, to this general election period. And she's running against an absolute MAGA named Jim Banks. And so we really need your help and support in order to win, obviously, in November. Dr. Val's platform has a multitude of items, but one of the top, if not the most important thing for her, is women's health issues and reproductive rights. She says it all the time. And in fact, when she was at one of the women's strikes associated with MADVoters recently, she went a little extreme in her speak, and it went pretty viral. But she said that when all of these legislators are trying to push legislation between a woman's legs into her bedroom, it's another form of molestation. And it's exactly how she feels. Val is at an age where she is tired of having to fight the same fight over and over, and she is just flabbergasted that we're still doing this fight, you know. And so that's where she is. So I will try to speak on her behalf until we get these technical issues taken care of. So I'm sorry about that.
Thank you so much. You know, Dr. Valerie is another one of our MVPs along with these other three amazing women. So we're happy to have her and her campaign on here helping out with that. Valerie, I did get to hear her speak at that, and she does feel passionately about this just as much as any of us. And we appreciate her showing up to fight. You know, it's important every time that we show up. So I'm going to get back to the former question. And that is, have you noticed an impact of the abortion ban in your area? And what does that look like? And anybody who wants to answer can answer.
I'll answer first. So in my area, there are 3 counties to the north of us that don't have any birthing centers or hospitals that can give birth. And the county to the west of me is either has closed theirs or is closing their last birthing center or maternity ward. So I live in Fort Wayne. We're already seeing the impact here. I run a buy nothing shop and community center out of my house. And there's a lot of people who are asking for baby stuff. And this is my second or third year doing it. And this is the first year we've ever had nonstop baby requests, formula requests. And it's not even just necessities. It's just like, well, it is necessities, but it's just clothes and things like that. It's not necessarily just food. It's everything you would need for a baby because so many people are having them now. Which of course makes the food banks and everybody else have more of a burden to have to help everybody. So we're seeing negative impacts a lot already. And again, it's just a lot of fear here. It really is, even in the city.
I can chime in real quick for Dr. Val. One of the things we had a long conversation about and that she constantly says is with her being obviously a federal candidate and affecting everybody statewide and federally, is that in these rural areas, it's not just a bans off our bodies issue. It's like basic necessities. It's basic access to healthcare. So if in our most rural areas, there's not even prenatal, postnatal, and natal, just care when you're in the planning phases of your family, then, nothing else is accessible, right? We're not even just talking abortion, but just reproductive rights in general. And Val and I had a long conversation about this yesterday on the drive back from Vigo County. I used to be the women's health director for the state of Indiana under Miss Daniels' administration. And in that role, I oversaw 92 health centers or health programming centers for women's health. And even then, 11 years ago, we were having issues where some of these women weren't able to get access to basic birth control, a Plan B, just basic things, right? So if you're a person of color or a person who's living in poverty and doesn't have access to those basic things, abortion doesn't even have to be the issue that we even talk about. It's basic healthcare for these women. So yeah, I think one of Val's most passionate pieces about this is how do we get the people in the rural communities access and make sure they continue to have it. And that's one of the ways we can do it as they continue to make legislation, as Heidi and Stephanie and Abby make legislation, is we've got the right wingers always saying, oh, you baby killers. Like we see it all the time, right? On Facebook and on social media. Well, it's just basic access to care. So there's tons of stories that women have come forth to us and told us about on social media and reaching out via our website and all kinds of things. And Val is just infuriated with it all. So, yeah.
I'll go ahead and go next. So the question is, how is the ban affecting our area? Fortunately for us, we still have our hospitals up and running and functioning. So we have places where people can deliver and so forth. I'll just take a little bit of a turn here for a moment. What I find when I'm knocking on the doors is that people are actually uneducated about this. There's a lot of misconceptions that when I, start talking about women's rights and how do you feel about, your wife or your daughter, so forth, not having access to the full women's reproductive rights and healthcare, they're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And when I say things like, well, abortion has been restricted, birth control is now on the IVF, people are not hearing it. At least where I'm at, they're not hearing it. There's a certain segment of the population that is not tuning into it. Perhaps we don't have good media coverage here, but I'm surprised at how much it's like the continuum is either it's like us on this call that we're like totally in the know and we understand what's happening, or they don't understand what's happening. And my parallel to that is the gun permitless carry. When I mention that, people don't know that that's been passed either. So if you get outside of Indianapolis, there tends to be that, this void, this gap in information. So that's what we're experiencing. So in some ways, we have to do more education at the door and on the phones to get people caught up to understand why we're so, you know, why we have such a sense of urgency about what's happening here. If the three of us don't get elected to the state house, if we don't break this supermajority, because we can break the supermajority by just electing or flipping 4 House seats, we can break the supermajority. If we don't do that, more extreme things are going to happen to us in the springtime. There has never been a greater sense of urgency right now than there is in this moment. And because you all are on this call, I know we share those concerns, we have shared values. And so it's up to us on this call to figure out what's going to be the next steps to getting us all into the state house and getting us elected.
Yeah, I was actually going to say something really similar, Heidi. I'm finding similar issues with sort of a misunderstanding of what was actually in the bill, right? Like folks not realizing, you know, they'll say like, well, you know, for rape and incest, there are exceptions. Well, there are up to 10 weeks, right? And
Right.
there are people I've known who didn't even know they were pregnant until 12, 14 weeks, right? Fatal fetal abnormalities are only up to 20 weeks. Well, there are plenty that don't even show up until 24, 25 weeks. In fact, my cousin, this was before the ban, and she lives in Illinois, but it was 26 weeks when she found out that her baby was not going to make it, right? And she had to make that horrendous choice. And so I think that is the piece that we need from folks on this call and folks across the board, is to be talking to everyone about, you don't have to go into all the details, but those two pieces in and of itself, I think, are super important for people to understand, that even the exceptions that are in there are not enough. They're actually not protecting the little girls, the women that they are supposedly meant to protect. So I think if I was going to ask folks anything around that education piece too, it's like, the more you can talk about those two pieces, the more you can have coffee talks with your neighbors and happy hours with your neighbors or whatever it is, and really help them understand how critical this is, I think the better off we'll be. Because I'm with you, Heidi, I'm hearing the same thing, and I'm hearing the same thing even right in Marion County. And so I think it's pretty critical that we continue to push that educational piece too.
Absolutely agree. And, you know, we have a short memory too. So even if maybe people did hear a little bit about what's going on in the news, they forget. If it doesn't affect them, it's not something that they're really thinking about. So each time we speak up, it's really important. I have this trick where I speak louder than I really need to when I'm in public, so other people around me can hear my conversation about really important things. You know, try not to be rude, but people need to hear the information. I think that this is a really great segue, especially based off of what Heidi was saying about people really not knowing what might be coming. What do you think we have in store for us here in Indiana as far as us not taking action? What do you think is next for us?
So it sounds like Stephanie, Jo, Abby, and I are all running against the same kind of person, right? They all authored or voted for the most extreme ban, the amendment that actually got voted down. Their own party said it was too extreme. But I believe that in this coming spring, those same individuals are going to come back and they're going to try for more, right? So even if they have rape and incest, you can have an abortion up to 10 weeks. Who's to say they're not going to say 8 weeks now, right? Just keep chipping away. You know, when you look at the continuum of the abortion laws that have been passed in this country, what is it? Something like, I don't know, 400 and some abortion laws have been passed, and they just chip away at the edges and they keep going. And you know what that does to the rest of us? It sort of normalizes the conversation. It's the whole thing of what Stephanie Jo was saying. It's like, well, we can still get an abortion if it's rape and incest. Yeah, but only up to 10 weeks. Perhaps now in the spring, they're going to come and they're going to make it 6 weeks, 8 weeks, but they're going to keep chipping away at women's rights. Keep chipping away at women's rights. You know, we also need to be thinking about how we expand this conversation about reproductive health, and recognizing that all the policies, not just the ones that are like for us, for women's rights specifically, but all the policies, when we don't pass universal pre-K, that affects things. When we don't have a minimum wage that is a livable wage, that affects our health. That affects our ability to make a decision about if and when we're going to have children, right? And that's our decision. We should be able to make those decisions. So at some point, I want us to be able to start broadening this. And I think that that's what Carrie was saying about Dr. Valerie's position in terms of like thinking more broadly about healthcare in general. Go even beyond healthcare. It's the economic policies. It's the education policies. You know, what they're currently doing with our high school graduation requirements, right? They are dumbing down the curriculum, right? Dumbing down those requirements. They're changing education in Indiana wholesale, and half of us don't even know that it's happening. But if we have poor education, we have a poor understanding of our bodies, we have a poor understanding of what's possible, right? These are all things that contribute to taking away our rights, taking away our agency to be able to determine our life path. That's what I'm so angry about this, that we are trying to take away the agency of people to determine their path for themselves. That these, forgive me, these old white guys sitting down in the state and making decisions about my girls, about your girls, about all of us on this call, women's rights are not negotiable. This is outrageous in 2024 that we're sitting here and we're having to talk about this. But this is the sense of urgency. This is where we have to go. This group here, every single one of us has to start acting now. Not come Labor Day, because that's what everybody keeps telling me. Oh, the volunteers will show up after Labor Day. We need you now. We need you now.
Heidi, I'm gonna jump in, or well, you're done, but but yeah, I think it all goes back to basic human rights. Like it literally is basic human rights for Hoosiers. That is the tenets of everything that we're running for. All comes back to even having a good standard of living, like good quality of life is a basic human right. And if our kids can't access college because they didn't get educated enough, because they were out working in a factory farm instead of being in 8th grade, like it's intentional, it's by design. They're trapping our kids here. And I know this conversation is a lot focused on women's reproductive health, but this affects our boys too, because what they're doing is essentially treating us like cattle to create more workers for them. And they like, it's textbook what they're doing, and it's textbook fascism. That's what it is. A lot of people are scared of that word, but it's a playbook that they are following. So what comes next for us is more fascism. It's just, if we don't stop it, it's going to keep going. And in Indiana right now, 16-year-olds can get married. So we're talking about 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds who are going to be married off to grown men who then can't legally even talk to an attorney for 2 years until they turn 18. So they are, and by 2 years, you can have 2 kids unless you have, you know, twins or triplets, and you'd have even more. And so they're using anchor babies to trap women so that we have more babies, so that we have more workers for them to exploit. Federally, you know, they're removing basically OSHA regulations and everything that keeps us safe, everything that keeps them from putting lead in our meat. You know, like these are the regulations that the Supreme Court are saying, yeah, they don't matter. They have no power now. So like focusing on Indiana is super, super important, but you know, having Dr. McCray in there is also like, we have to focus on both, because even if we somehow manage to win in Indiana, we still have to fight against federal. And that includes where our tax dollars go. That includes how are we spending Indiana's tax revenue? Are we keeping it in our state? Are we investing it in our state? Are we investing in our communities? Are we sending it overseas to a genocide? What are we doing with our tax dollars, and how can they be used here instead of to cause mass trauma other places? Because that's happening. If we have situations where we have to live off of food banks and our kids are starving and our parents have to decide whether or not they're going to like eat or let their kids eat, buy their own medication or buy food for their children. And I know a lot of people in my community who make that decision every single month. medications or food for their kids or food for themselves. It's only gotten worse, and it's just going to continue getting worse because price gouging has continued. When you have corporations buying back their own stocks that US tax dollars bailed out, that's a racketeer scheme. So if we can't just focus on one thing. We can't just focus on reproductive health care. We have to focus on the entirety of what makes our community a community, because a lot of people don't even know their neighbors. And you can't have community if you can't talk to your neighbors. If you're too scared of your neighbors, we're not going to have community. So this goes back to everybody on this Zoom going and talking to your neighbors. If you don't know them, go bake some cookies and take it over there. Like, it's not too late to really kick it old school and go out and talk to people. If you are able-bodied and can, I know COVID's still a very real thing, but it's all of us having conversations. If every single one of us always talk very loudly out in public, even if they're not in the conversation, they're going to hear it. Explaining what an abortion is, explaining what happens at the end of a pregnancy when somebody is having complications and they need to remove the child. That's technically an abortion. That's not allowed, so we need to make sure that we're educating on all levels, but mostly just bringing it back to individual humans. Your
I
neighbor.
do want to.
Yep, go ahead. Yep.
I was just gonna say, I do want to bring attention to what Katie said in the chat, because I think that that's really important too.
Yeah.
Just taking us back a little bit to what might be coming next, because it's not just what might be coming next. It actually is. It was already filed last session. The one giving me the most concern is the personhood for embryos. We saw the Southern Baptists actually voted to make that a reality in their community, and the Republican MAGA agenda, the far right, has followed their agenda for the last 25, 30 years. And so it is a very scary reality that legislation is going to come back up to make embryos, give them personhood. That it becomes a reality and a harm across the board for all people. And when we're talking about this not just being a women's issue, this becomes an issue for the LGBTQIA community not being able to have children. It becomes an issue for any families who can't have children without IVF. It becomes a huge issue all around. And so I can tell you with probably 90% certainty that bill is coming back. I think the criminalization of abortion medication will likely come back. That one is not going to get held up by the Supreme Court. Thankfully, the one thing that maybe did happen recently, but it could go back, right? And so those two things are real things that are definitely going to happen, and they're going to happen in the next 8 months. So I think for me, like I get so concerned and it's not even scared, not the right word, but just anxious about the reality that like these two things are going to happen. So what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to stop it? And to Heidi's point, the only way we can stop it is to break the supermajority in the state. If things happen federally that we don't want to happen, more power is coming to the state, not less. And so that means that if we don't break the supermajority, it's even more dangerous. And so, Abby, to your point, focusing both on state and federal is super, super important, because both things need to be true. But if one or the other is not, we're in real big trouble. So I just really want to make sure that folks saw Katie's comment, because that for real already did happen, and it will happen again.
Right.
Next,
And,
I can chime in real quick. Oh, go ahead.
I was
Sorry,
just going
Jill.
to say, they throw this legislation out there to test the waters. They want to see how we react. And so that's why it's so important to react. When we see this legislation coming across, you got to call your legislators right then. And then you need to call them again, and you need to be writing emails. And, you may think that you're screaming into this echo chamber, but you're really not. People notice. And especially, we had a day where we had people call the state house over something, and they were getting thousands of calls. Assistants were finally answering the phones once people got through, going, "Oh, we know." That is important. It is important, because then a lot of people were talking about it. And so that just made it bigger and bigger. So watching this legislation, even if we don't think it's a threat, it might be. It might be, hey, we're just testing a little bit. And then they're going to come back with more loopholes covered the next year because they've got these genius lawyers working on it. So yes, I'm glad that Katie brought that up too. And Cherry, please, I know that you're on the line with Dr. McCray. Please share her thoughts with us.
You know, so I was just trying to read what she's writing and then kind of bring it to you guys. And technology is wonderful until it's not. But I will tell you that Dr. Val has always felt that women's reproductive rights is a human right. Heidi, you hit the nail on the head. She says that, and it's all over her website and all over her social media. It's just a basic human right, right? So when she does get to DC, she's going to push for legislation that protects access to nationally to abortion with those FDA approved medications and procedures that, you know, that women actually need. She's going to defend access to emergency medical care and everyday reproductive care. So some of that gets watered down throughout. Val just said, I keep trying to talk and they can't hear me. And I'm like, I know, Val. So I'm trying to read everything she's writing me. So she wants to strengthen access to high quality, affordable contraception to anyone who needs it and wants it. So above and beyond abortion, and then safeguard the privacy. So for Val, it's about the woman and her physician. No one else's damn business, right? That's just strictly, she wants to safeguard that privacy. It comes down to just basic HIPAA laws. Stay out of their bedrooms, obviously, and stay out of their doctor's offices. Ensure they have and she wants to ensure that those providers and the patients continue to have access to that accurate, age-appropriate, medically informative information and legal resources that they need. So that's one of the things in her platform. And then while she's trying to accomplish that from the federal level, she is going to try to look at legislation that allows for the ability to have safe travels between states without any legal repercussions to seek reproductive health care. Because we all know somebody who's had to travel or know somebody who knows somebody close to them who's had to travel to get those services across state lines. And so to have, you know, repercussions, and even to be a physician here in Indiana, like Caitlin Bernard, who is facing or had faced some legal and professional licensing repercussions as a result, that's absolute bullshit. We shouldn't even be at that phase, right? We should be protected in some capacity. So she wants to focus on that from the federal perspective. And then finally, for the people who do choose to grow their families, she wants to support access to the services that they need for a quality of life. You've already said that, Heidi, about childcare, parental leave, breathable wages to support their families. If they want to have a family and they choose to, all those other wraparound services in their lives need to be available to them, regardless of where they are in their lives. If they can't afford access to enough food or shelter or whatever, they need to have those things, and education. She really wants to focus on the vulnerable populations from the federal perspective. So yeah. One other thing that really pisses Val off is the fact that there's so many unopened rape kits in Indiana. While everyone's so damn focused on what goes into our bodies, and you know what happens to our bodies as women, they're not focused on the fact that we're being continuously victimized, and those things aren't being addressed. Right. And then there's the last thing that I'm going to bring up is the fact that we have, so I think somebody did bring it up. There's so many OBGYNs that are leaving our state because they're scared to death about those repercussions. And so we do have a shortage. I saw that shortage firsthand when I was in women's health. It was starting to happen in 2009 when I started into this Indiana State Department of Health. And now it's astronomical. The fact that 2 in 3 Black women, or 3 women who are Black are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. That's nationally, and it's a little bit worse in some parts of our state versus others. Okay. And women who are treated by people who look, think, and act and feel like them tend to have better results. Well, if those doctors are leaving our state, they're not getting the care that they possibly could need. And obviously, if we don't even have OBGYNs to begin with, we're not going to get anywhere. So there's just so many pieces that we can look at from the federal perspective. And so I don't, I could go on and on and on, and I'm sorry about that. This is why I'm not the candidate, because I could probably never get anything done because I'm so pissed off about it. But I'm just glad that we're having this. And so I've said everything. Dr. Val says, I promise you, and I've said it before, I'm fierce and I'm resilient. I will not back down from this fight. And when I make it to the Senate, I will make sure that we enshrine or encode, codify Roe v. Wade. So Clap, yay!
Yes, thank you both. Truly, thank you. And I do, since you brought up the rape kits, I want to say there was legislation put forward this past session that was going to try to take steps to deal with this backup of rape kits. Nobody talks about it. Nobody. And this was something that I brought up to people during the session. Did you know that this was even a problem? And people were like, are you kidding me? Like, this is like they were blown out of their minds that this was a problem. And so for me, this is something that I think is important to talk to people about. Like, okay, first, 97% of rapists never serve a day in jail. So, like, we have that. On top of that, we're thousands of rape kits behind and even coming close to prosecuting any kind of a predator. And people just, it puts things into perspective for them a little bit better. Like, oh my God, we are not even helping the people who are suffering from this. And, so just kind of, since you guys brought that up, this is important legislation to support. This is positive legislation for reproductive health care and things like that. So yes, thank you for bringing that up.
And just to piggyback on that, Chelsea, from a psychologist's hat, abortion does not cause mental health issues. It's lack of access to the resources that these women need that lead to depression and other anxiety, general anxiety disorder, all the other disorders that we're often diagnosed with as women as we age, because we don't have access to the things we need. And it comes down to that healthcare, lack of access to that healthcare in general overall. So Val said, please make sure you say that. Also, she can share the studies that we may need to help report that from a psychological perspective.
But also, I want to add to that, like most parents who have had, or most mothers who have had to give their child up for adoption, newborn child, they usually needed about a one-time payment of $600 to be able to keep their child. That's it. Like, it's most newborn adoptions are not because they don't want their child. It's because they are coerced and convinced that it is better for them to give their child to somebody who can afford it than for us to make parenthood affordable so that everyone can keep their child. So I think that is a big thing that is definitely part of this reproduction, and definitely going back to the rape kits, and children can now have children. Men can go to a high school and pick who's going to be the mother of their child, and there's nothing that can stop them now. And I think that that is a really, really big thing that we need to focus on as well, is just, it's all connected. And yeah, I'm angry. Hold on. It's all connected.
It is. It very much is. So one of our questions is similar to what Kathleen has asked in the chat. Kathleen asks, what phrases have you found to be the most effective to communicate the importance of getting involved in campaigns, voting, and the importance of voting to support reproductive health care to their future? Our question was, how do you approach this topic with people who oppose abortion? So I think that there's a little room for discussion with this, as far as like, how are you approaching people to talk about this? And what are the most effective ways to communicate people that you guys have found?
Just being completely blunt and honest and not being a politician has been the most effective way for me to just actually talk to people, because I think a lot of, especially the younger generations, they look at politics and they don't respect it. They don't see it as anything that holds value. They see it as something that's actively harming us, because especially in our state, it is. So when I talk to younger voters, I don't talk to them through the lens of, I'm a politician trying to get your vote, I want you to get involved in politics. I talk to them from a, yeah, how bad has your life sucked so far? Like, what's getting better? What's getting worse? And what are we doing for it? And it goes back to that community. Like, even when the college in Indiana had a huge protest and they set up an encampment, it was people who weren't necessarily students who were providing water and providing supplies. And that is community building. So I know a lot of younger people are very, very active in activism, and they don't necessarily want to follow the route of canvas training and all of that stuff, because it just reminds them of something that in their eyes isn't worth it. So completely changing the way you even communicate with them. It's not about getting anything out of them. It's just, yeah, tell me all your burdens, and then see how your burdens match my burdens, and maybe we can handle this together. And that's been the most effective way for me to reach my constituents and younger voters.
I would
see that.
piggyback off of what Abby is saying, in that you approach it from a place of humanity. I'm a mom. This is what I'm experiencing. This is what my daughters are experiencing. This is what other voters have been telling me, right? I present facts, saying things like, did you know, right? First of all, they hardly even know who the current state rep is. And when I share that the abortion ban could have been more extreme, because that's what our rep voted for, do you know that on the same day they made that vote for a more extreme abortion ban, he voted against workplace accommodations for pregnant women? So in Indiana, so did you know in Indiana, you are forced to have a pregnancy, and an employer is totally within his rights to say, no, I'm sorry, you can't have an extra bathroom break. No, I'm sorry, I know you're on your feet all day. You can't have a stool right now to take a break or get an extra break. That's the reality in Indiana. And so that elicits a picture in their minds. They can see that, right? They can feel that, what that must be like. A pregnant woman working, and she's on her feet all day and she can't have a stool, right? And then I move into the concept of that women don't have control over their bodies. They don't have control over their lives. They don't have control over their families. And what are we going to do about that? And just leaving it open-ended and letting pregnant pauses happen, no pun intended, letting the pauses happen. Don't fill the space. And a good friend of mine who is a fantastic trainer, she once said to me, she goes, you don't have to fill your head with lots of facts and know which bill did this and all of that. She's like, we all possess inside of us already the ability to have these conversations, because it is about humanity. So what I'm saying is that new volunteers, if you go out and have conversations with, and you've never had that conversation about women's rights, just know that you already possess all the information you need, because it's a conversation about humanity. So to me, that was, when I learned that a couple of years ago, I found that very comforting, because I think a lot of times we think we have to get schooled on all of these things and know percentages and research and so forth. And yes, when we become legislators, we absolutely want to be evidence-based, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, while we're trying to communicate and galvanize people, we have everything we need right here and right here to make that happen.
Yeah, I would also,
Thanks.
Agree. No, I was just going to say that I agree with Heidi, and that I want to say what she said. Find the thing that resonates with you the most, the thing about this abortion ban, the thing about us losing our reproductive health care, and let that be what you focus on. That's okay. Connect to people on that personal level. That's all I wanted to say, Stephanie.
yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, I've been working with young people through the AmeriCorps for 25 years. And what I have learned about folks who are 17 to 26 years old is that they are far smarter than we are, than I am at least. And their ideas are generally better than mine. And so one of the things that I would just tell you, if you're on the phone or you work with young folks, is to ask them not to be scared to tell their own ideas. Candidates that are running, we're just people. I'm just a mom that lives in a house in Indianapolis that goes to work every day. And I need those voices in my head. I need folks who understand the population that they interact with the most to tell me what I should be doing. to gain the attention and action of young people. So we have a couple of folks volunteering on our campaign that are college age, a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old. And I've literally just said to them, you help me develop the plan to talk to our young voters. It's not going to be me that decides the best way to do it. And they are coming up with, they have already and are continuing to come up with phenomenal ideas on how we engage. They've forced me to have a TikTok account, which I don't love, but I have one. Don't look at it yet. It's not great. I'm working on it, but they have plans for me. We'll see how it goes. But I would just say, like, if you're on this call and you're a young person, we don't know any better than you do. So I would say use your voice, call us, reach out to us. If you're scared to knock on a door, just come walk with me because I don't like to walk by myself. You can hold the phone and check off things on the phone while I knock on doors. But I guarantee you have more power and more knowledge than most of us do. The other thing I would just say is when I do talk to young people and they may think like, oh, this doesn't really affect me yet. I'm not really thinking about reproductive rights. The biggest thing I tell them, but I tell this to anybody, is like, you know, I hope you never have to make that choice. I hope you don't. I have never been put in the position to have to make that choice. But don't you want the choice if you are put in that position? Because I know I do, and I know I want my baby girl to have that choice if she's ever put in that position. And I will protect whatever choice she makes if she decides to have an abortion or not have an abortion. Right? The idea is about protecting the choice, and so that's what I would also say too. Is just you just want to always make sure that you are put in a position, if you have to make maybe the hardest decision of your life, that it's your decision and nobody else's.
Absolutely. Dr. McCray.
Yeah, Val, can we hear you yet?
Yes.
Yay!
I don't know. Can you?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. You know what? This conversation has been wonderful. I get a chance to just rest and hear everything I think coming out of someone else's mouth, which is good. I get to kind of like just, hey, I got a sisterhood out here that's pretty darn strong. And I'm really encouraged by that because I think we're bigger in numbers than what we think. And I think that we're going to actually win in November, all of us, as far as getting this point out. One of the things, the last thing she asked is, what do you say to people when you're walking up to people that are, you know, they say they're pro-life? I'll say I'm pro-life too. But what I'm thinking is I want as many babies to get here as possible. I want as many beautiful babies to get here as possible. But the way I want to go about it is to make sure that women have the best opportunity to say yes, that we make situations happen such that she doesn't lose her job, she doesn't lose her career, she doesn't go into poverty, she's not stuck in this situation the rest of her life, that she's not stuck in a domestic violence situation. We want to make sure that women are in a better position to say yes, because you know, it's just a better situation, and that child is loved and everything around that child goes into a positive direction. Let's work on those things that make yes easier. Saying no or blocking her ability to make a decision is not the right way to go. If anything, you're forcing a situation, forcing misery that doesn't have to happen. And so that's how I approach people that are so adamant about this. There seem to be basically pro-birth, but not necessarily. And I remind them, that sounds like you're pro-birth, but there's nothing in the legislations that are coming through that says that you're actually pro-life, because pro-life would mean that you're worried about the health care of women, that you're worried about the schools, that you're worried about the wages, that you're worried about that child when it gets old, if it's going to have adequate health care when it gets to be a senior citizen. We're talking about birth to death, to natural death causes. We're talking about, that's our focus, is the quality of life from birth all the way into the end of life. And if we think about that, we're the real pro-life people here. And so they're pro-birth, but not necessarily pro-life. So I remind them of that in as nice way as possible, sometimes not so nice, but that's another conversation as well. But gosh, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that we were able to hear your voice. Not that we didn't believe you, Cherry. We believed you. We just now we know for sure she's here and talking.
I
One thing that
know,
Valerie
right?
forgot
I
to
tend to give
mention.
myself a,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
One thing you forgot to mention, Val, is we learned from my son, my 17-year-old, who is, he's a good kid, but Val and him had a conversation a couple of weeks ago when we had a cookout, right, at Val's house. And Val said something like, so do you want your birth control taken away from your partners? And Jaden, my son, was like, oh, my birth control. And she's like, yeah, did you know that Louisiana is attempting to restrict access to birth control, to abortion pills and birth control by classifying them as a controlled substance, as a narcotic? And my 17-year-old about shit his pants. So that is one way to get your young people that you're engaging to really get involved because they don't want the birth control going away. I just want to say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it would depend on the crowd you're talking to. There's something at stake for almost every generation. Even the grandparents are being stuck with raising their kids' kids. So grandparents are not allowed to rest anymore. Now they have to raise a third generation. They've raised their children. Now they have their grandparents. And now they're raising their grandchildren and their great grandchildren. And so there's no rest for them either. So there's something at stake here for every group, but they have to realize it, that this is not a cool thing to just have to make people have babies. And the thing about it, it's a form of slavery. Somebody said that today in my living room. She was like, that's a form of slavery. And the men are recognizing this too. This is binding them up in a way, binding them to relationships they don't necessarily want, binding them to child support that they don't necessarily want as well. So this is our fight, but we will have to consider that they've got a stake in this game too, and they need to live up to that stake and help us make this happen and reverse this Dobbs decision. I want to work really hard to get the right to have an abortion enshrined in our Constitution. France did it, just maybe 6 weeks ago. They were able to do it. I think what happened in the United States scared them to death, and they decided to enshrine it into their Constitution. And that would be my goal going to the Senate, the U.S. Senate, is to make sure that this is not even an issue anymore, that it's in our Constitution. It will take 2/3 majority vote, but hey, miracles happen. I think we might get more people in the Senate each year, and maybe even this year, because a lot of people are angry, and there's a lot of women, and definitely a lot of pro-choice women and men that are coming up on the scene in the Senate. So not only look at my race, there's races all around the country that are very important to this race as well. So I think there's a strong possibility we can turn this tide. That Project 2025 is rightfully scaring everyone into how crazy this could get. So hopefully that will help get people out to vote as well. We have to use every avenue we can, but the main thing is get the young people out to vote, get the disenchanted people out to vote. And if we have to pick people up and just start with little things, we started just stopping people in malls and say, hey, are you voting? And hand them a card. Have you voted? Give them something exciting to vote for. That's for one thing. And we've got some strong candidates that are not the typical candidates, as you can hear on this call.
Thank you so much. And I mean, we got a lot of really great ideas as far as talking to some people. So please take what the candidates have said, take what feels comfortable to you. And, like they said, speak from the heart, get personal with people. So if anybody has to hop off, please feel free. We try to keep these panels at an hour. We did have one more question that we got from somebody that we're going to ask. And if you have the time, please answer if you would like to. This question is, if elected, what tangible or attainable bill would you put forward related to reproductive rights? I know we'd love to see bans overturned, but what's something that we could work on getting pushed through, even if it means working across the aisle with the supermajority?
I'm really glad that you asked this question because there are things that we can do. I was talking with the folks over at Planned Parenthood the other day, and one of the things I know that they're really interested is extending the time frame of access to birth control, right? Sometimes you can get 3 months. Some small places you can get 6 months, but they're really talking about, is it possible to get to a 12-month access, and that goes to these areas, especially rural areas where folks aren't having access. I think that's a real thing that we might be able to push through. It'll take some work. Even that will take some work, but I think it's a real thing. If we're able to break the supermajority, I think we could start with like whittling away at the exceptions and issues with fetal and issues as well. I think we could start whittling away at those weeks instead of going down. We might be able to start pushing those back up. We'd have to break the supermajority in order to do that. So as Heidi said, that's 4 seats in the State House. Those are 2 things that I definitely think that are possible. And I know that there are organizations working on it. And so if you are interested in being helpful in that way, definitely reach out to Planned Parenthood, because I know that they're working on what their legislative agenda is going to be next session. And I know they'll be looking for advocates for it as well. But I think that long-term access to birth control could be a huge thing for us in the state.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to see that happen, like you said, especially for the rural areas. And that might be something that we can talk to if you are in a rural area and you want to reach out to your legislator and maybe even put that in their ear already. It does not hurt. Our legislators are here to listen to their constituents and try to make legislation that will help offer some relief to their constituents. And so something like this would offer a lot of relief to women living in rural situations, especially women living in domestic violence in rural situations, because men will use pregnancies as a form of abuse and control, and these women need to be able to stay safe. So having that 12 months of birth control could really be life and death for some people. So that is some great legislation that I really hope to see come forward and get worked out.
And I appreciate you naming, like, just reach out now. Also, if you happen to live in a place that might have a moderate Republican representing, there's not many of them, but like I said, there are a couple. And if you have someone like that who might be representing your area, those are also great folks to reach out to too, because those are the folks whose support will be needed in order to push these kind of things through.
100%. And
I would love to see some sort of work towards, you know how they show all these ages of babies at 9 months, 6 months, 5 months. You know, they need to be more realistic and show what an actual fetal, embryo looks like at 2 months or 6 weeks or 4 weeks, or those earlier weeks where people are making the 90% of those decisions. And I think that just pushing this narrative that people are killing babies that are formed babies, I think we need to be pushed back at that and saying, if you're going to give this picture, give the full picture. And push legislation for the full truth. If you're going to tell this part of the truth, tell the full truth. And I don't know if that could be legislated or not, but we can definitely start demanding something like that, because it's misinformation.
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure we can make a law that says you have to use factual information and you can't use misinformation publicly if you're
Or partial information.
Yeah.
Exactly.
yeah, if they can allow us, if they can
Exactly.
say we can use misinformation, surely we can find a way to say, well, actually.
Yeah.
But, we're also going to be working towards the relief of the period tax again this year. Senator Yoder is going to be working on that legislation once again. So we're excited about that. Shelley Yoder has also filed bills to require CPCs to be licensed. This is legislation that we're going to be seeing. So there is stuff that we can do even with the supermajority. Do not give up hope. Please support the candidates who are going to fight for your reproductive health care. and show up for them, because we need all the help that we can get grassroots style here in Indiana, making sure that we are, like Abby said, building back our community, because that is how we thrive as a community. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. I know Katie put a whole bunch of information in the chat. Go through, take some screenshots, take some pictures of all of this information, and reach out to these four amazing candidates. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight and giving us more than an hour of your time. We are really looking forward to seeing you more on the campaign trail and seeing you get the volunteers and the support that you truly deserve for your campaign.